Tears streamed down Zara's face as she sat motionless, staring at the man seated before her guardians. His appearance was pitiful. His clothes barely clung to his thin frame, his skin rough and unwashed, telling the story of a life spent in hardship. He was not the kind of man she had ever imagined discussing marriage with, let alone as her intended husband. Yet, there sat Mr. and Mrs. Daramola, their faces stretched into pleased smiles, as if they were bestowing upon her a great honor rather than throwing her away. In that moment, she questioned if they had ever truly loved her. Zara's life had been a series of misfortunes. Orphaned as a baby, she barely had memories of her parents, just blurred, fading images that never formed a whole picture. Her relatives took her in, but love was never part of the arrangement. She was tolerated, fed when convenient, and reminded at every opportunity that she did not belong. Eventually, their patience wore thin. One evening, without a word of explanation, they drove her to an orphanage, knocked on the heavy wooden door, and vanished before anyone could answer. The orphanage became her home, not because she wanted it, but because she had nowhere else to go. It was neither cruel nor comforting. It simply was. She learned not to expect too much, not to hope too hard. Meanwhile, far away in the city, a wealthy couple battled their own pain. Mr. and Mrs. Daramola had spent 8 long years waiting for a child who never came. They tried everything: doctors, prayers, sleepless nights filled with desperate whispers. But the silence in their home remained unbroken. Hope had begun to fade, replaced by a quiet sadness, until one day they made a decision. If fate refused to give them a child, they would find one themselves. Their search led them to the orphanage, where destiny had its own plans. The moment they stepped inside, their eyes landed on a little girl standing alone by the window, the sunlight casting a soft glow on her delicate features. Her presence was striking, fair-skinned with large, expressive eyes that held a depth far beyond her years. Mrs. Daramola's heart clenched. Who could abandon such a beautiful child? The adoption process moved quickly. Within weeks, Zara became theirs. The day they took her home, she sat silently in the back seat of their luxurious car, her small fingers gripping the seatbelt, her mind racing. The orphanage was all she had ever known. Could this truly be a new beginning? When they arrived, Mrs. Daramola knelt before her, gently tucking a loose curl behind Zara's ear. "This is your home now, my love." For the first time in years, warmth spread through Zara's chest. She hesitated, then threw her arms around her new mother, holding onto her as if afraid she would disappear. From that moment on, everything changed. The Daramola's home, once silent and lifeless, overflowed with laughter and joy. Zara was their miracle. They enrolled her in the best schools, showered her with love, and soon something remarkable happened. Opportunities that had once seemed impossible began to open. Mr. Daramola, who had struggled for years to land a major business deal, suddenly found himself bombarded with offers. Doors that had remained firmly shut for so long now swung open with ease. Their lives flourished, prosperity seeping into every corner of their world. Overjoyed, they decided to celebrate. They took Zara out for dinner, treating her to a lavish feast. The night was filled with laughter, a rare moment of pure happiness. But as the evening wore on, something strange happened. Mrs. Daramola suddenly excused herself, rushing to the restroom as a wave of nausea hit her. At first, she brushed it off. Perhaps she had eaten too quickly, or maybe it was just the excitement of the night. But as the days passed and the nausea persisted, a thought took root in her mind, sending chills down her spine. The moment Mrs. Daramola saw the positive pregnancy test, her heart clenched and tears flooded her eyes. 8 years of waiting, of hopeless nights, of whispered prayers, and now, finally, The impossible had happened. Overwhelmed with joy, she ran into the living room, scooped Zara into her arms and whispered, "Mommy is having a baby." Zara's eyes widened. "I get a little brother or sister?" "Yes, my love." That evening, when Mr. Daramola returned from work, she shared the news. His reaction was instant. He let out a triumphant cheer, lifting his wife off her feet in sheer excitement. Finally, he was going to be a father. And just like that, everything changed. At first, Zara was just as excited as they were. She helped rub her mother's belly, spoke to the baby in hushed tones, and imagined all the fun she would have as a big sister. But soon, something shifted. The little things. Her mother no longer brushing her hair at night, her father being too tired to read bedtime stories, became more frequent. She told herself it was just temporary. But then, one afternoon after school, she returned home to find her mother waiting at the door, her arms crossed. "You won't be going back to school," she said flatly. "We need to start saving for the baby." The words hit Zara like a slap. No school? She loved school. It was the one place she felt normal, where she laughed with her friends, where she wasn't just an adopted child trying to fit in. But, she started. But Mrs. Daramola had already turned away. The matter settled. And so, the days became longer. Hours of endless chores. Scrubbing floors, washing clothes, cooking meals. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Every complaint was met with irritation. "Why are you whining, Zara? Stop being lazy. I'm the one carrying a child, not you. You should be helping, not complaining." Then came the room change. She had always loved her room. The cozy space where she had spent countless nights wrapped in soft blankets, dreaming about the future. But one evening, she was told to pack up her things. "The baby needs the space," Mrs. Daramola said as she gestured toward the smallest room in the house. Zara blinked. "Where am I supposed to go?" "You'll stay there," her father replied, pointing to the tiny, empty room. No bed, no furniture, just a thin mat on the cold floor. She stood frozen for a moment, waiting for someone to tell her it was a joke. It wasn't. Tears burned her eyes, but she swallowed them down. Crying wouldn't change anything. Her father must have noticed the look on her face because he gave her an empty promise. "I'll fix up the room for you, don't worry." She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. But as weeks passed, all she received were old, discarded furniture pieces while the baby's room was decorated to perfection. And that's when it became clear. She was no longer their priority. Months later, the baby arrived, a beautiful girl they named Mila. The house exploded with joy. Mila was adored, kissed, held, pampered like a little princess. And Zara? She became invisible. At first, she told herself it was normal. Of course, babies needed more attention. Of course, her parents were exhausted. But as time passed, it became obvious. The love that once wrapped around her so tightly was now reserved for someone else. She had been replaced. She was no longer the child they doted on. She was the one who cooked the meals, cleaned the house, and ran errands. A baby caring for a baby. She spent sleepless nights rocking Mila when she cried, feeding her while her parents slept soundly, her tiny arms carrying responsibilities far too heavy for her age. The insults came next. "Why are you so slow, Zara? You should be grateful. We took you in when no one else wanted you. Why can't you be more like Mila?" That last one stung the most. Mila was everything she was not. Wanted, cherished, loved. The bedtime stories were gone. The goodnight kisses. A distant memory. The warm family dinners. She now ate alone. She became a ghost in her own home. An afterthought. A duty they no longer wanted but couldn't get rid of. She endured it because where else could she go? The years passed, and Zara grew. The quiet little girl turned into a strong, resilient young woman. But no matter how much time had passed, the scars remained. Now, at 23, she was still in that house. Not as a daughter, not as a sister, but as a maid. Zara never had a chance. Not in that house, not in that family, and certainly not with Mila, the spoiled, entitled princess who had everything Zara never did. From the moment Mila could walk, she was pampered like royalty. She threw tantrums, and her parents rushed to soothe her. She wanted something, and it appeared before she could ask twice. She never lifted a finger, yet she looked down on Zara as though she were dirt beneath her designer heels. While Mila paraded around in the latest fashion, Zara wore hand-me-downs so old they barely held together. While Mila threw extravagant parties with her rich, shallow friends, Zara scrubbed the floors before and after the guests arrived. While Mila spent nights at high-end clubs, drowning in music and expensive drinks, Zara lay awake on her thin mat, wondering what she had done to deserve this life. And then Mila found the adoption papers. It was an accident, really. She had been digging through Mrs. Daramola's dresser, looking for spare cash to fund her next shopping spree. Instead, she found an old, yellowed envelope tucked between layers of silk scarves. Curiosity got the best of her. She tore it open. And there it was. Zara wasn't her real sister. She wasn't even blood. Just some orphan her parents had picked up when they were desperate. Mila's lips curled in disgust. This girl had been living under her roof all these years, sharing their food, their space, breathing their air. That night, she stormed into Zara's tiny, suffocating room, a cruel smirk plastered on her face. Zara was kneeling on the floor folding clothes, probably clothes that belonged to someone else because nothing she owned was truly hers. Mila tossed the papers at her. So, it's true. Zara looked down, her breath catching in her throat. She had always known she was adopted, but seeing it now, in Mila's hands, twisted something deep inside her. Why does it matter? She asked softly. Mila laughed, a cold, heartless sound. Because I've spent my whole life thinking you were just some unlucky kid. But now I see the truth. You're a charity case, a nobody. Zara's fingers clenched around the fabric in her hands. Get out of my room, Mila. But Mila wasn't finished. She took a slow step forward, her voice dripping with malice. This isn't your room. This isn't your house. You don't belong here, Zara. You never did. After that night, Mila made it her mission to make Zara's life unbearable. She would spill juice on the floor and make Zara clean it up, then step in it on purpose so she had to mop again. She forced Zara to do her friend's laundry, dumping bags of expensive clothes on the floor and warning her, make sure nothing gets ruined or you'll regret it. She invited her snobby friends over, mocking Zara in front of them, laughing as they threw insults her way. She slapped Zara over the smallest things, an unmade bed, a cold meal, a wrong look. And Mr. and Mrs. Daramola did nothing to stop her. In fact, they encouraged it. She's just telling the truth, Zara, Mrs. Daramola would say with a smirk. You should be grateful we even let you stay, Mr. Daramola would add. Every single day was a nightmare. The night before, Zara sat hunched on the thin mat in her tiny, suffocating room, her back pressed against the cold wall. The air felt heavy, but that was nothing new. She had learned long ago that in this house, even the air refused to offer her comfort. Then the door creaked open. Her father, Mr. Daramola, stepped inside, hands folded behind his back, his face unreadable. The moment she saw him, she knew something was wrong. He never came to her room, not unless it was to bark an order or remind her of the countless things she hadn't done right. She stood up hesitantly. Sir? She had stopped calling him Dad long ago, his lips pressed into a thin line. Tomorrow, you will meet someone important. Zara frowned. Who? He ignored the question. You will behave yourself. You will sit quietly and listen. And when the time comes, you will agree. A chill ran through her. Agree to what? Mr. Daramola exhaled through his nose, as if tired of the conversation before it had even begun. You'll see. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, shutting the door behind him. Zara stood there, confusion quickly turning into dread. Agree to what? But deep down, she already knew. Zara sat stiffly in the living room, her fingers gripping the edge of her worn-out dress. Across from her, a man she had never seen before sat awkwardly on the couch. He looked rugged, his hands calloused from hard labor, his dark skin smeared with faint traces of cement dust. The scent of cheap alcohol clung to him, but his expression wasn't unkind. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at her before lowering his gaze. Her father's voice boomed through the silence. Nathaniel is a hard-working man. He's a bricklayer, one of my workers. He wants a responsible wife, and I told him I have just the girl. Zara's stomach twisted. This was it. She turned sharply to her father. I won't marry him. The words left her lips before she could stop them. Firm, unapologetic, unafraid. Her mother, Mrs. Daramola, who had been silent up until now, let out a slow breath. Then, in a voice as sharp as a blade, she delivered her verdict. Then pack your things and leave. Zara's breath caught. Her father didn't even blink. You're old enough to start your own life, Zara. If you don't want to do as you're told, then you have no place here. Mila, who had been lazily sprawled across the other couch, thoroughly enjoying the spectacle, let out a laugh. I'd start packing if I were you, she taunted, twirling a strand of her perfectly styled hair. Zara's fists clenched. So that's it? After everything? After all I've done for this family? Her voice cracked, anger and pain tangling together. Her father barely spared her a glance. You were never part of this family. The final blow, the last nail in the coffin. Nathaniel shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his head. I don't want her to be forced. Mr. Daramola waved a dismissive hand. You can take her now, or you can wait until you have enough to pay the marriage rights. Either way, she's yours. Zara felt her world crumble around her. Her parents were selling her off like she was an unwanted piece of furniture. Nathaniel looked at her now, waiting for an answer. Her lips parted and she wanted to scream, no. But where would she go? She had no money, no education, no one outside these walls who cared. She could already see it, her father standing at the door, arms folded, waiting for her to choose, her mother watching with an expectant smirk, Mila grinning in victory. Zara swallowed down the bile rising in her throat. Then, in a voice so small, so broken, she whispered, Fine. Her father leaned forward. Fine what? Tears burned her eyes, but she forced the words out. I'll marry him. The room relaxed the moment Zara gave her response. Her father leaned back, satisfied, as if he had just closed a business deal. Her mother smirked approvingly, and Mila was practically glowing with amusement. Zara, however, felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no relief, just emptiness. Her fate had been sealed, and she had finally grasped the full weight of what it meant to be powerless. As she turned toward her room, Mila stood up, stretching her arms with a dramatic sigh. Well, at least the house will feel lighter now, she muttered, grinning. Zara ignored her, but Mila wasn't finished. Of course she wasn't. She trailed behind, her steps slow and lazy, watching Zara like a hawk watching prey. Don't think you're sneaking off with anything that belongs to me, she said, pushing past Zara into the tiny room. I don't trust you. Zara didn't even flinch. Of course, Mila would turn her final hours in this house into a spectacle. She knelt beside her old bag, the same bag she had once dreamed of packing on her own terms. Her fingers moved numbly, folding the same few dresses, slippers, and scarf. Her entire life reduced to a handful of fabric and memories she didn't even want. Mila snatched the bag the moment she zipped it up. Just making sure you're not stealing. Zara clenched her fists. Mila, do you really think I want anything from this house? Mila's grin widened, her voice dripping with false pity. Oh, Zara, you never had anything to begin with. Zara let out a slow breath. This was it, the last jab. The final insult, and for the first time in years, she smiled. Not out of happiness, but because she realized something. Mila had spent so much time trying to make her feel worthless, because deep down, she was afraid Zara had something she never would: strength. Zara turned toward the door, bag in hand, only to find her mother standing in the hallway. For a moment, there was something in her eyes. Guilt, regret, doubt. But then, she spoke. "We're sending you away for your own good." Zara blinked. Her own good? That was the best lie they could come up with. Her mother sighed, crossing her arms. "You're grown now, Zara. You can't expect us to feed you forever. It's time for you to start your own life." There it was, the truth behind the fake concern. Zara held her mother's gaze, waiting for a real reason, a real excuse, something that didn't sound like a pathetic attempt at justifying what they were doing. But nothing came. She wasn't being sent away for her own good. She was being discarded. Zara nodded, her voice hollow. "You could have just said you didn't want me." Her mother scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Must you always be so dramatic?" She gestured toward the door. "Go. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Zara walked past her without another word. There was nothing left to say. No carriage, no dignity. Instead, Nathaniel stood beside a yellow kiki. Mila's laughter exploded through the air. "A keek? Oh, this is just perfect." She clapped her hands mockingly. "A fitting exit for a fitting person?" Zara didn't react. Mila wanted a reaction, and she wasn't getting one. Nathaniel cleared his throat, looking more uncomfortable by the second. "Let's go." Zara climbed into the cramped, rusted tricycle, pressing her bag against her chest. Nathaniel followed, tapping the driver's shoulder. The kiki sputtered forward, and just like that, she was gone. The ride was silent. When they finally arrived, Zara felt her stomach drop. Face me, I face you. A place where doors were never fully closed, where neighbors lived in each other's business, where privacy was a luxury no one could afford. As soon as she stepped out, she felt the weight of eyes on her. A group of barefoot children ran past, their feet kicking up dust. A woman, wrapped in a faded wrapper, sat outside peeling yams, her eyes scanning Zara up and down like an uninvited guest at a wedding. "Who be this one?" A man leaned against the wall, puffing a cigarette. "Nah him new wife?" A few girls her age stood by a stall, their arms crossed, whispering among themselves. One of them smirked. Another one don enter wahala. Zara clenched her jaw. She wasn't even through the door, and already she was gossip material. Nathaniel led her through the narrow corridor and into a small, dimly lit room. The moment she stepped inside, the reality of her situation suffocated her. The walls were stained, the air thick with the scent of dampness. A thin mattress lay on the floor, covered in a faded sheet. A single wooden chair sat in the corner. No wardrobe, just a pile of neatly folded clothes on the floor. A plastic bucket sat near the entrance, half filled with murky water. This was home now? She stood frozen, staring at the room like it was a prison cell. Her hands trembled as she set her bag down. She had lived in neglect before. But this? This was something else entirely. The weight of it crashed over her. The betrayal, the humiliation, the suffocating helplessness. And for the first time since she had walked out of her father's house, she broke. She turned away, pressing her palms against her face, her shoulders shaking as the sobs she had fought so hard to suppress finally spilled over. Nathaniel shifted awkwardly near the door. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something, maybe to comfort her, maybe to apologize. But instead, he exhaled and walked away, closing the door behind him. And just like that, Zara was truly alone. By the time they arrived at Nathaniel's small room, the weight of the day had settled deep into Zara's bones. The Kiki ride had been rough, bumpy, almost poetic really, because wasn't that what her life had been? A constant jarring journey, one she had no control over. Nathaniel opened the door, stepping inside first. The dim light flickered weakly as he motioned for her to enter. She hesitated. Not because she had anywhere else to go, but because this place, this unfamiliar space, felt like just another cage. She stepped inside, her body moving mechanically. She was exhausted, drained, but most of all, she was broken. Nathaniel didn't say much as he set down his bag and moved toward the tiny corner that served as a kitchen. Within minutes, the scent of warm food filled the air. Zara didn't look up. She sat stiffly on the mattress, clutching her knees to her chest, her mind still trapped in the house she had left behind. The voices, the insults, the way they handed her off like a spare item in a clearance sale. Nathaniel placed a plate in front of her. Rice. Something simple, but it smelled good. Eat. His voice was soft, not demanding, just patient. Zara didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even acknowledge the food. He sat beside her, not too close, just enough to let her know he wasn't forcing anything. Zara, I know this isn't what you wanted. Still, she didn't speak. I know today was terrible. He let out a small breath, rubbing his palms together. But I need you to eat. Nothing. Nathaniel shifted slightly, trying again. Look, I'm not like them. You saw the way they treated you, right? Zara flinched. Of course, she had seen it. She had lived it. His voice softened. I don't know what they made you believe about yourself, but you are not worthless, Zara. You are not a burden. She let out a shaky breath, her fingers digging into her arms as silent tears slid down her cheeks. Nathaniel reached forward slightly, but the second she noticed, she shifted away, her body tense. His hands dropped. He didn't push. He understood. I'm not expecting you to trust me. Not now, maybe not ever, but I will prove to you that you are more than what they made you believe. For the first time that night, she looked at him. Really looked at him. Before, all she had seen was his poverty, the rough clothes, the struggling life. But now she saw something else. Kindness, determination. A man who wasn't just taking a wife. He was willing to wait for her to heal. Nathaniel sighed, running a hand over his head. Just eat something. Even if you hate me, even if you regret this, just eat. Zara's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She hadn't been spoken to with kindness in years. And somehow that scared her more than anything. Thank you for watching. Please do well to subscribe, like, and comment to support our growth.